The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the weathered timber building, and Willa Harper pressed her trembling fingers against the frost-covered window, peering through the darkness at what would become her new home in Randsburg, California. Though the bitter February wind howling through the high desert made her question whether she had made a terrible mistake leaving Boston 3 weeks ago. Snow swirled in angry gusts along the dusty Main Street, an unusual sight in this mining town nestled in the Rand Mountains, and Willa pulled her thin wool coat tighter around her shoulders, already regretting that she had sold her heavier winter clothing to afford the train fare west. The driver yanked open the door, and icy air rushed inside, stealing her breath and making her eyes water. She clutched her carpetbag and stepped down onto the frozen ground, her worn boots slipping slightly on the unexpected ice coating the wooden boardwalk. "This is it, miss," the driver said gruffly, already hauling her trunk down from the rear storage. "General store and boarding house. Old Martha runs it. She'll know about your arrangements." Willa nodded, unable to form words through her chattering teeth. She had never experienced cold quite like this, the kind that seemed to pierce straight through to her bones despite being in California, which she had foolishly assumed would be warm year-round. The driver deposited her trunk with a heavy thud and climbed back onto his seat without another word, eager to reach the livery stable and warm his own frozen limbs. She stood alone on the boardwalk, watching the stagecoach disappear into the swirling snow, and felt the weight of her decision settle over her like a physical burden. 3 months ago, she had been working as a seamstress in a crowded Boston tenement, barely earning enough to keep herself fed. Then she had seen the advertisement in the newspaper. Gentleman rancher in California seeking virtuous woman for marriage, must be hard-working and kind, travel expenses provided. The correspondence had been brief but seemingly sincere. Xavier Emerson had written in careful script about his cattle ranch outside Randsburg, about the growing town, about his need for a wife to help build a life in the West. He had sent a photograph showing a tall, broad-shouldered man with serious eyes standing beside a horse, and Willa had studied that image countless times during her journey west, trying to imagine what her life would become. Now, standing in a blizzard in the middle of the night in a town she had never heard of until 2 months ago, she wondered if Xavier Emerson even truly existed or if this had all been some elaborate deception. The main street was deserted, most buildings dark, and the cold was becoming dangerous. She needed to find shelter immediately. Willa grabbed her trunk by one handle and dragged it toward the door of the general store, her carpetbag banging against her hip. The door was locked, naturally, and she pounded on it with her free hand, trying to make enough noise to wake someone inside without appearing completely desperate, though desperation was exactly what she felt. After what seemed like an eternity but was likely only a few minutes, she saw a lamplight flicker through the front window. The door opened a crack, and an elderly woman with gray hair in a long braid peered out suspiciously. "We're closed," the woman said. "Please," Willa managed through her shivering. "I'm Willa Harper. I just arrived on the stage. I'm supposed to meet Xavier Emerson. I'm his intended bride." The woman's expression shifted from suspicion to surprise, then to something resembling pity. She opened the door wider and warm air rushed out, smelling of wood smoke and coffee. "Lord have mercy, child. Come inside before you freeze solid. Xavier didn't mention you were arriving tonight. Come in, come in." Willa practically fell through the doorway, dragging her belongings with her. The woman, who introduced herself as Martha Finch, helped pull the trunk fully inside and shut the door firmly against the wind. "That man," Martha muttered, shaking her head. "I swear he couldn't organize a one-horse parade. He told me you were coming next week. Next week." And here you are in the middle of a blizzard, which nobody expected because we hardly ever get snow here, and certainly not like this." Willa stood dripping melted snow onto the wooden floor, still shaking so hard she could barely hold herself upright. Martha studied her with shrewd but not unkind eyes, taking in her bedraggled appearance, her too thin coat, and her obvious exhaustion. "How old are you, girl?" "22, madam," Willa answered. "And you came all the way from where? Your letters were postmarked Boston." "Yes, madam." "From Boston." Martha sighed and gestured toward the back of the store. "Well, you cannot meet your intended husband looking like a drowned cat in the middle of the night during a freak snowstorm. Come upstairs. I have rooms for boarders. You'll stay here tonight, get warm and rested, and we'll sort everything out in the morning." "I don't have money for a room," Willa admitted quietly, humiliation burning in her cheeks. "I spent everything I had getting here." "Xavier can pay for it when he comes to collect you," Martha said firmly. "Now stop arguing and follow me before you catch your death." The room upstairs was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in quilts and a window overlooking the main street. Martha brought hot water for washing, a thick nightgown that smelled of lavender, and a bowl of leftover stew that Willa ate so quickly she barely tasted it. Once she was alone, she crawled under the quilts and felt warmth slowly return to her limbs, though her mind remained restless with worry and uncertainty. She must have eventually fallen asleep because she woke to pale morning sunlight streaming through the window and voices rising from the street below. Willa sat up, disoriented for a moment, then remembered where she was and why. Her heart began to pound. Today she would meet Xavier Emerson in person. Today her new life would truly begin. She dressed quickly in her best dress, a modest blue wool that she had made herself, and tried to arrange her dark brown hair in a neat style, though her reflection in the small mirror showed a young woman with anxious green eyes and cheeks still pale from yesterday's ordeal. She looked exactly like what she was, frightened and out of place. When she made her way downstairs, she found the general store already busy with customers despite the early hour. The snow had stopped, she noticed through the windows, though everything outside was covered in a thin white blanket that was already beginning to melt in the strengthening sunlight. Martha stood behind the counter, weighing out flour for a customer, but she caught Willa's eye and nodded toward a table in the corner where a pot of coffee sat warming on a small stove. "Help yourself," Martha called. "I sent word to Xavier at first light. He should be here within the hour." Willa poured herself coffee with trembling hands and sat at the table, trying to appear calm while her stomach twisted itself into knots. Other customers glanced at her curiously, and she heard whispered conversations but could not make out the words. No doubt everyone in town already knew about the mail-order bride who had arrived during the freak snowstorm. She had been sitting there for perhaps 30 minutes when the door opened, and a man walked in, and Willa knew immediately that this was Xavier Emerson. He matched the photograph, tall and broad-shouldered, but the picture had not captured the way he moved with quiet confidence, or the weathered tan of his skin, or the concern that flickered across his face when Martha pointed toward Willa's corner. He crossed the store in long strides, pulling off his hat as he approached, revealing sandy brown hair slightly too long and eyes that were a startling shade of blue-gray. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with strong features and calloused hands that marked him as a working rancher. When he reached her table, he stopped, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other. "Miss Harper," he said finally, his voice deeper than she had expected. "I owe you a considerable apology. I had the dates wrong, and you arrived to find no one waiting in the middle of a snowstorm." That must have been terrifying. Willa stood, grateful that her voice came out steady. "Mr. Emerson, I'm just relieved to know you're real and that I haven't made this entire journey based on false information." Something that might have been a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "I'm real enough, though probably not quite what you imagined based on our letters. May I sit?" She nodded, and they both settled into chairs across from each other. Now that he was close, Willa could see the lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting into the sun, and a small scar along his jawline. His hands rested on the table, large and capable, and she noticed that he seemed nearly as nervous as she felt. "I want to be honest with you right from the start," Xavier said quietly, leaning forward slightly. "My ranch is 20 miles outside of town, up in rougher country. It's not fancy. The house is solid but small and the work is hard. I run about 200 head of cattle with help from 2 hired men who have their own cabin on the property. I'm not rich, though I make